Shalom, shalom. It's your brother again, Brother Tekoa Malachi. And we're coming back to you and give you another installment of the message of identity. Today, we're going to deal with the mindset of our oppressors. So we're going to go through this presentation and give you a video to let you see that the Bible is prophetic. There's no other book that prophesies so much history throughout the ages or throughout the generations other than the Bible. That's why I don't understand why people can reject it, because no other ancient text has prophetic history in it and prophesies things before they happen like the scriptures. So today we're going to be talking about the mindset of our oppressors and show that was in the scriptures of time, the same mindset that was of ancient time as the same mindset that happened in our time through our captivity. So we're going to deal with the mindset of our oppressors today, and let's see what we have. May the Most High bless this teaching. Let's move forward. All right, the first place we're going to stop is Micah 2 and 2. Again, that's Micah chapter 2, verse 2, and it reads, "And they covet fields and take them by violence. Houses they take away, so they oppress a man and his house." And watch this, even a man and his heritage. Let's read that again. Now, this is what the Most High was letting us see and showing us the hands that we would be delivered to. The mindset of our oppressors, how they would be, how they have worth in ancient times and how they are now. It says they covet fields that are not theirs. They covet it in order to take it. That's why you can see men like Christopher Columbus over there with the natives of the land. He went over there and just put a flag in the ground and said that was his and that was his land. So they covet fields and they take them by violence. He came over there, he took their land, snatched them up by violence, and then they gave a holiday to commemorate what the man did. And we celebrate that every year. They take houses, they take those away. So they oppress a man. Not only do they oppress a man and his house, they would take a man and prophesy prophetically, was talking about what would happen to us. They would take a man and his heritage. That means they would take his culture, they would take his language, they would take his books, his libraries, everything that made that nation a nation. They would take that and contribute all those contributions to society from them. Have that not happened throughout our generations? We got a people now that's claiming that have taken our heritage and claim themselves to be Jews. But just like Revelations 2 and 9 that speaks of, I know the blasphemy of them that call themselves Jews and are not. Now let's go to Zechariah chapter 11 verse 5. Dealing more with the mindset of the oppressors, because we got to understand this to understand how they systematically broke us down. Because I always wondered that how can maybe a slave master and a few guards that he had control 50 to 60 slaves. It had to be something that was going on psychologically, some type of plan, some type of blueprint that was able to transfer to each other in order to control the mind of the slaves. Zechariah 11 verse 5, whose possessors, watch this, they slay them, and then they hold themselves not guilty. And they that sell them say, "Blessed be the Lord, for I am rich." And their own shepherds pity them not. So these oppressors, they would slay and they would not hold themselves guilty. Just like when they came over there and snatched our people out of Africa. They came and slapped some of the natives out of America. They don't hold themselves guilty. The way that they justify what they did is by saying that we were savages over here running around and looking crazy. That's why they show you all the natives that's over in Africa, some of the tribal ones that's out there in the jungle suits, and everybody was not walking around in Africa like that. But they show you that in order to justify the enslavement of them, because they wanted to, in so many words, institutionalize them and give them their ways. which really they was giving them ways that they have stolen from other ancient cultures. But they hold themselves not guilty, and they sell them and justify it and say, and they become rich and justified and say, this is how we will civilize the savages. Even got us to the point that we say that today that we are appreciative that our ancestors came over here through all those things because they were savages, which is as farthest away from the truth. So let's keep going. Psalms, they not only take a man's land, they not only take a man's heritage. That's dealing with his name also too. Let's read Psalms 49:10 through 12. But he said that wise men die, likewise the fool and the brutish person perish, and leave their wealth to others. Their inward thought is that their houses shall continue forever. This is what they're thinking. The mindset of the oppressors. And their dwelling places to all generations. Watch what they do. They call their lands after their own names. That's why America is called America. That's why Africa is called Africa. Because they come over here, they conquer these lands, and they name the lands after them, after their own names. This is prophesied in Psalms 49:10 through 12, letting you see at ancient times they was doing that, and they're doing the same thing now. And a footnote that not only do they name their lands, but they name the slaves after their last name to show that they was their property. Not only do the land, but also the slaves were named as property for their master. So this is the mindset to come in, take the land because they believed that they was the master race, that that God gave them all the land, so they would come in, murder, rape, kill people, take their land, make them slaves, make themselves rich, and also then give the slaves their name, so that will throughout their generations they'll forever be known as their property. This is how it can be said that their inward thought is that their houses shall continue forever. That is saying that their name shall continue forever. Their houses, their name, their so-called legacy. Because throughout our generations, we will be wearing their names. We'll be living in lands that is called after them. And we also will be celebrating holidays of their genocide of a people. So their houses shall continue forever. Their legacy is their mindset. Let's keep moving. Now, let's look at this Psalms 83, 2 through 8. This will let you know that it had to be an alliance of nations coming together against Israel, because when the Most High chose Israel, he made them the head and not the tail. He gave them power and he put the fear of them throughout all these other nations. They was the whooping stick of the Most High, that he would take them in to weed out different nations. So the nations had no power against Israel. So that would, throughout the years, get them upset, make them mad, and make them form an alliance to come against the Israelites. Let's see this alliance that has perpetually went throughout the generations today. And this is the first inception of the United Nations, the alliance. If you notice, the true Israel doesn't have a representative for them. So let's look at Psalms 83, 2 through 8. For lo, thy enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up their head. They have taken, watch this, they have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, come, let us cut them, who is the them, Israel, off from being a nation. We're going to cut them off from being a nation from what we set up, that the name of Israel may no more be remembrance in the earth. And if you look at that, that has been accomplished, because if it wasn't for the so-called Jewish people taking our identity, the name of Israel would be completely taken from the earth, because nobody would know who they are. Nobody would be able to prove who they are. But because somebody have taken on the identity of Israel, that is the only way that somewhat of Israel is being in remembrance. But let them cut us off from being a nation. They set up we're going to go through some of the things that they set up in order to cut us off, because their main goal is to never allow us to have unity, never allow the tribes to come together again. That's why everything is in place to keep the so-called African American, and keep the so-called Latino, to keep the so-called minorities for not coming together, not becoming a nation. Everything is set up for against the African American. They don't never want you coming together. So everything is systematically set up through every avenue to keep you from being a nation, to keep you from unity. That the name of Israel may no more be in remembrance, for they have consulted together with one consent. They have a confederate against thee. This is some of the people, the tabernacles of Edom, the Ishmaelites, Moab, the Hagarenes, Gabal, Ammon, Amalek, the Philistines, with the inhabitants of Tyre. Ashur also is joined with them, and they have hope in the children of Lot. These are all the people that have been warring against Israel. And if you look who Edom is, that's Esau's seed. He have a hatred against Israel because he felt like Israel took his birthright. The Ishmaelites, that's Ishmael's seed, they have a hatred, which is the modern day Arabs. They have a hatred against Israel because they feel like that Abraham pushed their mother and Ishmael out of the camp because of Sarah. So you go throughout the line, you will see this perpetual hatred that has came throughout the years against Israel. Let's keep moving. Now we're going to talk about the systematic things that they set up. Let's look at the psychology of creating the Negro, because they had to have certain things in place in order to eradicate the thought of the Negro ever learning who he was, ever his mind ever going back to him being a king, him being greatness. All they wanted you to let you know that you was wild savages running around in Africa, and they had to bring you over here to civilize you, to give you the so-called freedom that you have today. Now we're going to look at a book called Willie Lynch, or a letter called Willie Lynch, and the Making of a Slave. Now some people say that this is not real, but it doesn't matter. You look at the systematic things that this letter talks about, and you can see it being played out throughout generations. So if you try to say that somebody ain't really write it, you look at the letter and look at what happened, and you can see the reality of the Willie Lynch letter and the Making of a Slave. So let's look at this and see if we can find some of our conditions, some of our issues that they set up to keep us from being united. The Willie Lynch, let's look at what the letter said. I have a foolproof method for controlling your slaves. So this is supposed to be a man called Willie Lynch, that's addressing slave masters. They was having problems with slaves, running away slaves, disrespecting them, fighting them, revolting. So he's supposed to have been and went throughout all the slave plantations, a lot of the slave plantations, give them this system, and they say that this will control your slaves, even throughout the emancipation of slavery. So let's read what he said in his letter. He said, I have a foolproof method for controlling your black slaves. Guarantee every one of you that is installed correctly, it will control the slaves for at least 300 years. Minimum. That's over half the time that we have been over here. It says, if it's installed correctly, it will control the slaves for at least 300 years. So let's look at its methods. My method is simple. Any member of your family or overseer can use it. So the members of the family that control the slaves and the overseer. I have outlined a number of differences among the slaves, and I would take these differences and make them bigger. I use fear, distrust, envy for control purposes. So the objective is to outline our differences, pin us against each other from the differences that will create fear, distrust, and envy amongst our generation. If you look at that now, that is what's happening to us. That's one reason we can't have unity. The fear that we have of each other, and a sense of the fear of one of us doing better than the other one of us getting ahead of the other one, the distrust of one, we don't trust each other, and the envying each other. He said use all those for control purposes. Let's look at some of these differences that he made bigger. He said, take this simple little list of differences and think about them. There is intelligence, size, sex, size of plantations. Pen the old black male versus the young. Pen the dark-skinned slave versus the light-skinned slave. That is still going on now. We are one of the only nation of people. If you look at those over there that grew up in tribal nations in Africa of ancient time to now, they didn't clown each other about being dark-skinned and being light-skinned. They didn't clown each other about their hair texture because they was all somewhat of the same. And they knew how spiritual hair texture is. Now, so we don't understand that in the Western Hemisphere. That's why we can talk, laugh, and pick on each other about it. But everything about you is spiritual, even when it comes to your hair. If you look at your hand, and you see that the texture of your hand, if you look at the prints on your hand, and you look how everything is going in a spiral. Everything in your hand, a flat side or the white side of your hand is going in a spiral when you look at how it's connected. And how that is connected to spiritual. Even with your hair, it goes in a spiral. So it's different things that is spiritual about that. I don't have time to get into that now. But everything that way that God made you, he made you in a way that connects with him. But we don't understand that. So we took on the mindset of our oppressors by them getting on us, about us being dark skinned, some of us being light skinned, hair being nappy and coarse. And that's when we went through that stage of trying to put processing stuff in our hair so we can look more like the oppressors. Fine hair against coarse hair. House slaves against field slaves. You even got that still going on now in a sense. Old black male versus young black male. Status on plantations. Attitude of owners. Whether the slaves will live in the valley or on the hill, the east, the west, or the north. This let you see that they even had pin slaves against each other that would fight each other. They would have fights, almost kind of like how boxing or UFC is now. That some of the slaves would fight to their death. And some of the slave master would pin them up as really want a boxing match. It really was a fight to one of them give out. And what would happen, the master would tell them, well, if you don't win, I'm going to beat you. I'm going to sell your family. I'm going to do all this. So they was fighting in order to save the different things that they had built. But status on plantation. You see the east, the west, the north. You had some fighters that represented the north, some that represented the south, some that represented the east, some that represented the west. And we are a people that identifies with whatever we are part of. So if we with the Jones plantation, there was Penn Jones plantation on the east against the Matt Bean plantation on the west. Same thing with the north and the south. And that has carried on throughout our generations. Because if you look at it now, that is where you get your east, your west, your south gangs and all that from. Because we identify with a landmass and begin to identify with it, begin to take on the reality of it and say, this is the east side. That's what we represent. That's the west side. And all that came down from the history of the slave master pinning us against one another. That we'll be more loyal to a landmass or an area where we live rather than each other. You got the black slaves after receiving this indoctrination shall carry on and will become self-refueling and self-generating for hundreds of years, maybe thousands. These are some of the same things that cause us not to have unity. Intelligence, the size of us, the sex of us, man against the woman, the size of the plantation, old and young, dark and light, fine hair, coarse hair, house slave, field slave. All these things were set up to keep us with fear of each other, distrust of each other, and envy of each other. If you got these in anything that you're building, it will not prosper. Now let's see if we are just talking, or let's see if there was a systematic plan that was set up against the true Israelites. So we'll never come together, because if we come together, that is letting them see a foreshadow of us ruling that was promised to our ancestors, that the Most High will have the Israelites as the rule of the kingdom to come. So they do everything they can to come against this. So now let's see this plan that's continuing after slavery.
Oh, people
Start it over.
No, Howard. It's you liberals who have lifted them up, Howard.
Paul, you conservatives make a mistake. You can't afford to strangle hope in people. Without hope, people become dangerous.
No, Howard. You liberals have let them invade our society. You give them jobs, political jobs.
Paul, you missed the point. It's only the smart ones we move up.
That makes it even worse.
No, we have to move them up. If we leave a smart one in the ghetto, he might develop into a leader against us. But if we raise him up into white society, we neutralize him. He feels compelled to try to act like us. He loses his identity and his racial anger.
Loses identity.
He becomes alien to his brothers. They realize he sold them out and they grow to hate him. He becomes worthless to them and safe for us. No, thank you. In fact, in his love for the creature comforts, except for his color, he's become one of us.
Look at that, say he's become one of us. And we don't want to believe and sit here and believe that people sit behind closed doors to find out more ways that they can keep the truth from us, to keep us down, to systematically oppress us. We don't like to believe that. We don't like to believe that people sit down behind tables to find out more ways to oppress us, to keep us down, and to keep us separate. That nations get together to take the remembrance of us completely out of the earth. That man-made diseases are manufactured to kill us out. That Planned Parenthood clinics is set up everywhere that poisons and stuff is in the food in our neighborhoods that ain't in other neighborhoods across town in order to kill us. We don't want to believe these things. That's why when the Most High, when the Messiah come back, he wiping out all the heads of these nations and taking them out for what they have done to us. Let's keep moving. Let's see what Frederick Douglass, Let's Make a Slave, the original development of a social being called the Negro. This is the development and the making of a slave. Let's see what Frederick Douglass wrote. Frederick Douglass' Let's Make a Slave is a study of the scientific process of man breaking and slave making. This is how they was able to systematically, psychologically take the mind of us in order to control us. It describes the rational results of the Anglo-Saxon ideas and methods of ensuring a master-slave relationship. Let's make a slave, the original development of a social being called the Negro. Let us make a slave. What do we need? First of all, it was the interest and business of the slaveholders to study human nature. So they had to study human nature to see how to control us. And the slave nature in particular, with a view to practical results. Second, we will use the same basic principles that we use in breaking a horse, combined with some more sustainable factors. So they studied the human nature, studied the slave nature in particular, used the same basic principles of horse breaking, and combined them with sustaining factors. When you really look at it, they treated a horse better than they treated us. Our experts warn us about the possibility of this phenomenon occurring. For they say that the mind has a strong drive to correct or recorrect itself over a period of time if it can touch some substantial, original historical base. This is why they wouldn't allow us to read. Because they had studied and knew that the mind would take you back if it has some original historical base, it can take you back to that kingship, back to that priesthood, back to your role, function, and position if you had an historical base to go off of. That is what they're saying. This is why they didn't allow us to practice our culture. That's why they didn't allow us to be able to read. Because they was afraid that our mind would begin to refer us back to what we were and who we were. They advise us that the best way to deal with this phenomenon is to shave off the brute's mental history, create a multiplicity of phenomena, of illusions, so that each illusion will twirl in its own orbit, something similar to floating balls in a vacuum. Basically what they're saying, they would give us history, they would rewrite history, they would send us down different rabbit trails, even when we're trying to find our history. They have set up stuff so systematically that it's hard to even realize who we are. The one thing they couldn't keep us from was prophecy. Prophecy in the scripture. That's why I know that our oppressors couldn't write or fool with the scriptures, because they would have took if they did this much outside of the scriptures, they would have took every chance that they could get. That's why I know they didn't understand the scriptures. And if they fooled with the Bible, they would have taken all these prophetic events out of there. So we'll never have an opportunity to realize who we are and come back to the Most High. Let's keep moving. Let's keep moving. All right, we have this second part here. This part is basically talking about the making of a slave, and this is like a further examples of this to give you understanding and let you see what this is all about. And let's read what this is saying. Let's read what this is saying here. It says, take the meanest and most restless nigger, strip him of his clothes in front of the remaining male niggas. The female and the nigger infant tar and feather him, tie each leg to a different horse facing opposite directions. Set him on fire and beat both horses to pull him apart in front of the remaining niggas. This next step is to take a bullwhip and beat the remaining nigger males to the point of death in front of the female and the infant. It said, don't kill him, but beat the fear of God in him, for it can be useful for future breeding. So they look at us as animals. They would beat us. They would rip us apart. They would set us on fire, do different things in front of the other slaves and also the women in order to make them fear and to instill fear in us so we wouldn't do different things. This is how they controlled us. Since by doing this, we will have reverse relationship. In her natural uncivilized state, they call it uncivilized, she would have a strong dependency on this uncivilized nigger male. And she would have limited protective tendencies toward her independent male offspring and would raise male offsprings to be dependent like her. Nature had provided for this type of balance. We reverse nature by burning and pulling a civilized nigger apart and bullwhipping the other to the point of death, that all in her presence, by her being left alone unprotected, with the male image destroyed in her mind. The ordeal caused her to move from her psychological dependent state to a frozen independent state. In this frozen psychological state of independence, she will raise her male and female offsprings in reverse roles. What is that saying? They would take the males and kill them and rip them apart and her, and what she would do is raise her male child, take the man out of him pretty much and make him dependent or docile and make him be completely obedient to the master, so he would be able to keep his life. But they would raise the girl in a reverse role and have her dependent upon the master rather than her men. So the male image will be destroyed in her mind because she can't depend on him. That way she will put the master image in her mind and give him her body in order to get benefits from him. And teach her daughters that This ordeal caused her to move to her psychological dependent state to a frozen independent state. In this frozen psychological state of independence, she would raise her male and female offspring in reverse roles. For fear of the young male's life, she would psychologically train him to be mentally weak and dependent, but physically strong, because she has become psychologically independent. She would train her female offspring to be psychologically independent. What have you got? You have got the nigger woman out front and the nigger man behind and scared. And their whole ideology was to break down the strong structure of the family by putting them in reverse roles. Now, who is the master of today? The master of today is the government and the system. Because now the black woman does not have to care about what type of man she chooses, because the image of the man is destroyed in her mind. Because why? The government take care of her. The government give her her food, give her her money, give her her housing, everything she needs. She don't need the image of a man there, but just for sex. It used to be a day where a woman had to choose a right man, had to look at how hard worker he was and the different principles and character that he lived by, because she knew that her family and her life was at stake by what type of man that she would marry. So she would make better the choices who she would deal with. But by the image male being destroyed in her mind through the system now, which is the government, is the new master. The male image is still destroyed in her mind, and she raised her sons to be dependent upon a woman. Now, a young man, instead of being raised to be the man of his house, to be the authority in his house, he's looking for another mother, in so many words, where he is trying to find another woman on the system, move in with her, and live off the system in reverse roles, where the woman is being independent of him. Same thing that is going on now. It's happening. So let's move on. Let's move throughout the presentation. We got a few more things to hit, and we will be done. We're going to talk about the breakdown of the family, and we'll be finished. Matter of fact, we're going to stop right there, and we will come back and do the next rendition and talk about the curse and the breakdown of the family. But that's it for today. Shalom, and may the Most High be with you.